Hey guys, welcome to Digit.in, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the OPPO Reno5 Pro 5G. Now, when I got this phone, just taking it out of the box was actually a very nice experience. So I'll tell you why. I've been using this phone for about 10 days as well, and I'm going to be sharing with you some insights with respect to this phone. There's quite a few things that are very unique about it, and OPPO is doing some very interesting things with the Reno5 Pro 5G. So before we get into all of the details, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel, and of course hitting the bell icon also means you don't miss any future updates from us. With that out of the way, let's begin. First off, let's go over the specs of the Reno5 Pro 5G. It's quite a mouthful of a name, I must give them that, but the Reno5 Pro, we obviously know it's 5G, is powered by the MediaTek Dimensity 1000 Plus SoC. It's an octa-core SoC, and the interesting thing is it's actually using 4 Cortex A77 cores and 4 of the smaller Cortex A53 cores. With this 4 and 4 breakup, what they're essentially able to achieve is some very impressive performance. The SoC itself is based on the 7nm process, of course. Additionally, there's 8GB of RAM on the phone that we're reviewing, along with 128GB of storage, which unfortunately is not expandable. In terms of the camera, on the hardware front, you get a triple camera stack at the back. There is the 64 megapixel primary camera. Then there is the ultra wide at 8 megapixels and a 2 megapixel macro camera as well. The front facing selfie camera is a 32 megapixel shooter, so you have that. The display itself is a FHD plus OLED panel, so yay. It's got a refresh rate of 90 Hz, double yay, and a touch polling rate of 180 Hz. Now we see 240 Hz in popular gaming phones like, let's say, the ROG Phone 3, but this has a 180 Hz touch polling rate. It's pretty impressive. We'll talk about that in the performance section. And the peak brightness on this display is advertised to be 1100 nits partial, and that's because this display is HDR10 plus certified, and when you're playing back HDR content on this, there'll only be very specific parts of the scene that hit that 1000 plus nits of brightness, and it can achieve that. In day-to-day usage, of course, it's a little on the lower side in comparison to this number. Last but not the least, you've got the battery, which is pretty impressive again, but the most important thing about the battery aspect is the fact that it supports OPPO's 65 watt WCDMA supercharging. So overall, a pretty impressively spec'd phone, I have to say, by all accounts. But let's see if all of this specification on paper actually translates into real world impressiveness as well. And first, talking about that is the performance section. So I'm going to break this performance section down into two: synthetic benchmarks and of course real world usage. So first, let's go over synthetic benchmarks. Now, the MediaTek Dimensity 1000 Plus is a very interesting SoC. It's being pegged as the competitor to the Qualcomm 865, but at the same time, we're also comparing this phone to the likes of the OnePlus Nord and even OPPO's own Reno 4 Pro. So let's just go over where this phone stands when it comes to benchmarks. For example, with respect to Geekbench 5, the Reno 5 Pro beats both the OnePlus Nord and the Reno 4 with a single core score of 718 and a multi-core score of 3078. However, when you compare it to the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 processor based OnePlus 8T, with the review unit for which we have is also with 12 gigs of RAM, the single core score on that is 881 with the multi-core score coming in at 3045. So yes, single core performance is better on the Qualcomm chip, but the multi-core performance is slightly better on the MediaTek processor. Past that, if we look at the PC Mark 2.0 benchmark, and this is a benchmark that tends to simulate real world scenario and use cases, The Reno 5 Pro actually has the lowest score, which is actually very interesting. The Reno 5 Pro has a score of 6,971, with the OnePlus Nord clocking a score of 9,097 and the OnePlus 8T coming in at 9,413. Now let's talk about the GPU performance. Qualcomm's SoCs tend to use the Adreno GPU, which is their own in-house stuff, whereas on MediaTek you have Mali. Now typically Mali-based GPUs have had inferior performance in comparison to the Adreno counterparts. But over here we see some very interesting changes happening. On the 3D Mark Wildlife benchmark, the OPPO Reno5 Pro 5G scores 3,805, which is only 1 point behind the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 powered OnePlus 8T, which has a score of 3,806. Now, with that out of the way, let's look at where the Nord and the previous Reno 4 fall. These two phones have scores that are almost half of what the Reno 5 Pro 5G is able to deliver. Now, that is definitely impressive. And then when we move into even the GFX bench of suite, we see that the Reno 5 Pro outperforms the Nord and the Reno 4 Pro, but falls behind the OnePlus 8T, but not by a large margin. While the synthetic benchmarks do put the MediaTek chip very well into the flagship territory, there is a small caveat. MediaTek has a history of boosting performance for specific applications, basically benchmarks, when it detects them. While MediaTek refuses to accept that as cheating, in real world scenario, you would never want to run your CPU at thermal limits that could damage it, which is essentially what happens during benchmarks. We have not yet been able to verify if on the Reno 5 Pro that behavior still exists. It is something that we are investigating and will definitely update in the text review as and when it rolls out. But in benchmarks, this is what we're getting. I would want you to take it with a pinch of salt, which is why we're going to also corroborate this with real world testing. Using GameBench to actually record gaming metrics for COD Mobile and Asphalt 9, here are some interesting numbers. Call of Duty runs at 60 FPS with a stability of 89%, whereas Asphalt 9 runs at a frame rate of 58 FPS with a stability of 90%. Both of these games were running at their highest graphic settings. Now, if we look at the CPU state of the MediaTek Dimensity 1000 Plus SoC while you're gaming, we notice that all of the cores are synchronized. So the small cores are running at the one specific clock speed, which is the maximum clock speed, and the 4 Cortex A77 cores, which are the performance cores, are also locked at their peak clock speed. At all times during the game, all 8 cores are active. There is no point where they're not inactive. So the result of that is, of course, great frame rates, decent stability, but also heating. This is actually a phone that I've used in quite some time that I realized was getting warm while I was gaming. I haven't seen this behavior in a long time, and while this is something that can definitely be addressed via software updates, it is something that I noticed. Now the point here is, heating is a natural byproduct when your SoC is running at its peak performance, which is what you're getting out of the Reno 5 Pro. It's not uncomfortably hot, it does not throttle, it does not even get to a point where the phone gives you a warning that it needs to shut down. But it does get noticeably warm, and that is both on the back and the front. You can see the temperature readings well into the 40s in this shot here. But gaming aside, if you want to do photo editing or even use this phone just as a daily driver to run your business, conduct your work from home tasks, maybe even use it as a device for entertainment, which is watching Netflix, YouTube, Prime, whatever, you're not going to face heating issues. In fact, day-to-day stuff on this phone works so beautifully well, and multitasking shows zero stutter. When you're editing photos in Snapseed, the responses are fairly quick, the render time is very fast, and honestly, it feels every bit as a good performance smartphone as it should be, given the kind of chipset OPPO has decided to use on this phone. So that's a very interesting part about the Dimensity 1000 Plus, which is why I wanted to say that, you've got the benchmarks, which MediaTek sort of has a shady history with. But at the same time, the real world usage out of this phone is very impressive and definitely leaves zero room for complaint. But here's the thing. Modern day chipsets have become so powerful, and the apps that we run on our phones have not been able to make the most of them. So what I would wonder is, how would this phone fare in about a year and a half? That's something very interesting that I would like to circle back to in a year and a half. But for now, the performance out of the OPPO Reno5 Pro is impressive by all accounts. Next, let's talk about the display. The Reno5 Pro offers a 6.5-inch Super AMOLED display with a resolution of FHD+. That's 2400 by 1200. Now, the AMOLED display is definitely amazing, but what makes it even better is the 90Hz refresh rate, which makes the entire experience of using the phone, navigating through stuff, just everything is just a lot smoother. The touch sampling rate of 180 Hz also helps when you're gaming, especially when you're gaming, in fact, because that way you're not missing any kills, you're making sure that every swipe has the action register, and that's actually very impressive. Then the HDR content playback on this phone is definitely something to talk about, because I usually don't watch movies on my phone, but the few times that I've had to do that, once was on this phone, it was definitely an enjoyable experience because the display sort of takes over, and OPPO's AI sort of takes over. I would call it AI, but it's actually not, but and enhances the visual experience of whatever it is you're watching by automatically controlling the brightness, setting the right color profile. So if you're watching content on Netflix, for example, it definitely looks amazing. Do note that this phone is HDR10 plus certified, and Netflix HDR certification is still on the way, although not here while we were testing this. So stuff that I watched on Netflix was not in HDR, but YouTube HDR was definitely amazing. And some other files that we've got of HDR content was pretty impressive as well. Now let's talk about the cameras on this phone. The cameras on the OPPO Reno5 Pro 5G actually come with a new system that OPPO has developed, which has got a video focus. It's called the Full Dimension Fusion Portrait Video System. It's quite a mouthful. It feels completely marketing based, but let me just break it down for you as to what it exactly does. It's got a few AI based features that are designed to enhance your video. The first is for enhancing your low light shooting capabilities. If you're shooting in low light and you turn on the AI mode, which is this, which kicks in the Full Dimension Fusion Vision Portrait System, what it will do is it will sort of brighten the frame up and enhance the visual quality of your low light videos. So think of it like night mode, but for video. The other thing is HDR video. So if you're shooting in bright daylight, you can see a few samples on your screen right now, and if you're shooting in bright daylight, it applies an HDR tone mapping so that both the highlights and the shadows are retained as well as possible. The third thing that it offers is a portrait video mode. Now, this is again using it's probably using information gathered by at least 2 camera stacks. There's also a depth sensor in here. So it's using that information to generate bokeh on the fly. There is one small catch though. When you start recording, whatever bokeh level you have set, it's fixed. You can't change it on the fly. You can't change it while you're recording. So you have to be very mindful of how much bokeh you want in your frame when you're recording. The second thing is, when you even switch to the portrait video mode, it tells you it works best if there's only one person in the frame. So maybe group bokeh videos are out of the question. Then last but not the least, it's also got these color filters built in, but there is one particular filter that's actually a standout filter, and that is the AI color mode. What that will do is essentially it'll change the entire frame to black and white till a person pops into it, and the face will be in color, the hands will be in color. So it's like this selective color thing going. But what's really interesting is that all of this is being done on the fly in camera and does not result in any frame drops, any stutters, and it's basically been working pretty well. Like, I wouldn't call it flawless because that's definitely not the case, but the result from all of these modes have been definitely impressive enough to say that this is a very, very impressive step towards improving the overall video output from smartphones. Videos from low light do still suffer from noise, they do still suffer from a lack of detail, but the fact is that you are able to see a lot more than you would have probably been able to without shooting in this mode. So overall, this system that they've developed, which is a mouthful, full dimension fusion portrait video system, it's hopefully OPPO keeps improving it, brings it to other phones as well in their lineup, and overall hopefully the industry will adopt some of these technologies and we see more smartphones with better video output. Next, let's talk about the battery life. Now this phone is super light, it's super thin, so OPPO couldn't have packed a big battery in here. The battery inside is 4350 milliamp, but to make up for the lack of capacity, so to say, they've given you their super fast 65 watt charging. So first let's talk about how long does the battery actually last. Now I use this phone in two ways, one with the OLED display set to 90 Hz and then with 60 Hz as well. So when I was using the phone with the display set to 60 Hz, impressive battery life, about 1.25 days. So for example, if I would pull the phone off the charger at 9 in the morning, it would last all the way up to about 11 a.m. the next day. That's when I would need to charge it up again. This is with extremely heavy usage of well, mostly the web, secondly coordinating on messaging apps, multiple messaging apps, lots of Instagram, watching a few YouTube videos here and there, and of course at least 3 to 4 hours of music playback thrown in over Bluetooth. Switching over to the 90 Hz mode, the battery life came down to about a day. So easy, like if you go to bed late, you could definitely have this phone last till about 2-3 in the morning, easy, if you even start at 8 in the morning. But for me, I had to definitely charge it up at night. But here's the thing, you don't have to. The reason for that is the 65 watt super fast charging will top this phone from 0 to 100 in under 40 minutes. Now, a duration literally as short as brushing your teeth, which takes me about 4 to 5 minutes to do. I had the phone go from 8% all the way up to 42% in just that much time. It's definitely super fast. It's not a linear charge. It's faster on the lower, when your battery is on the lower side, and it slows down a little bit towards the end. But you know, just if you're getting ready in the morning for work, all you need to do is plug it in, and by the time you leave, even if you're not charged back up to 100%, this phone is definitely going to be in the 90s, and that's very impressive. Carry the charger with you so that you can top it up wherever it is that you are, and you know, you'd never run out of juice that way, and that's very, very impressive. There is just no two ways about it. So overall battery life, although the battery lasts pretty average in terms of its competitors, the fact that you can top it up so quickly is the reason why it gets an edge over the competitors. Last but not the very least, I want to talk to you about the design of the Reno 5 Pro. This phone is just 7.6 millimeters in thickness and weighs about 173 grams. And okay, so the context is that I've been using an iPhone 12 Pro Max, which is fairly thick and fairly heavy. So for me, this phone ended up being extremely light and definitely very thin. Also for reference, I'm literally just coming off of reviewing the Mi 10i, which is also fairly heavy and a thick phone. Irrespective of whether you use this without a case or with a case, it's still thin and light. Now here's the very interesting part. There is so much attention to detail with respect to the design of this phone. It's amazing. You've got an all metal frame all around. It's blue. This is the Astral blue color, and it's beautiful. But the real star of the show is this back over here. Now Reno's used a custom process that's been developed in-house on how to grow these crystals, the glass crystals, in a way that they bounce light in a specific manner. Instead of growing these crystals typically in the spherical shape, they've actually gone ahead and done this in a very unique manner, which is growing these crystals with 6-sided cones. I mean, there's a lot of science into this. They send these huge documents that actually explain the whole process, and the bottom line is they've put a lot of thought and a lot of R&D into creating this, and it's a very, very gorgeous finish. I would recommend people go for this over the black one because the black one doesn't have this soft satin finish. The other thing is that 0 fingerprints. This finish just does not take any fingerprints at all. Like, you could eat aloo parathas with achar and then hold this phone and this back is going to be just fine. The front, of course, comes with a screen protector pre-applied, and therefore does get a little smudge, but it feels a little more resistant to fingerprints from what we've seen on others. You could remove it. I refuse to remove the screen protector to actually tell you whether the screen itself is prone to smudges or not. The metal frame, on the other hand, will definitely catch not just fingerprints but also oil from your fingers, so you can see streaks on the top, on the side, but if you have this in the TPU case, it's not going to matter. The SIM tray is at the bottom and accommodates 2 SIM cards, nano SIMs, and there is no provision for a micro SD card slot. There's also no 3.5mm headphone jack, which apparently is now just the industry trend, but what you do get is a USB Type-C port for charging and data transfer. There is no wireless charging on this phone, in case anybody was wondering, and that's honestly fine. So in terms of the design, this is definitely one of the smartest looking phones in its segment out there, but there is a small catch. So here's the catch, and that's part of the conclusion. As of recording this review, we are not yet aware of what the actual selling price of the Reno 5 Pro 5G is going to be, but we do know a few things. This is definitely not going to be under 30K. Second, it has a 5G based chipset in here, so it is possible that it will be priced a little higher than what anybody expects. So if it comes in about under 40,000 bucks, this phone does make for a really interesting device. Why? Because it has a very good and impressive camera stack. It's got a great display. Performance is right up there with flagship grade hardware, and it's got this head turning design, right? So for about 40ish, definitely something worth considering. But if OPPO was to price us higher than 40, then we would have a problem, because then this phone is competing with some of the best, which is like the OnePlus 8T, even the OnePlus 8 for that matter. And when it comes to that, the Reno 5 Pro 5G may just not be able to hold its own, for simple reason being the Qualcomm chipset does tend to perform better than the MediaTek one. That's one. Secondly, Oxygen OS is just beautifully optimized for speed, and while ColorOS 11 has definitely come a long way in becoming a clutter-free and a clean experience, it's just not there, right up there with Oxygen OS 11 yet. So that's the conclusion as of now. Do I recommend this phone? Definitely, it's a great device to use. Do I recommend it for under 40K? Yes. If it's above 40K, you may need to think a little harder, and if it starts touching the obnoxious 50K mark, then you definitely have better options out there. So that's a review of the OPPO Reno 5 Pro 5G, one of the first phones from OPPO to sport 5G. Great phone, great device, great camera, and overall definitely impressive. So thank you guys for watching this video. Before you leave, make sure to subscribe to our channel, and of course hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates from us. As for me, I'm going to see you in the next one.